Sure.
I have a question about Joe, who you mentioned from the community, who is a game player as well. Is it also a student?
No.
Was that a strategic choice then to integrate players outside the classroom students, or did that happen organically?
Happened absolutely organically. So as we were building, we went down and spent a lot of time in the neighborhood. We met a guy who lives there. He's 92 now. He lives in the house where the first jail was built, and he brought us in. But he was, of course, didn't want to be part of that game. But Joe just happens to be on the street, and so if he's there, he's there. If he's not, he's not. But either way, you get sort of an interesting experience. You know, the learners who actually met Joe were like, yeah, we got to meet Joe. Right? And the learners who aren't, we hope maybe we'll go back and meet him and talk with him, and that's the goal. And we're hoping to actually expand that even more. We're working on thinking about, could we even simulate some of that, have our graduate students go down there at certain times, but it gets really tricky because we really care about that community, and we care most about telling their story. And so that's what we're working on.
Well, it's sort of beautiful, unplanned consequence that
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think Chris would tell you that he had no doubt that would happen. He's done a lot of mobile game stuff for schools in Milwaukee, middle schools, and there always is some sort of awesome thing that happens. He's like, yeah, I knew we'd meet someone. I was like, okay, great. So I think that would be his answer. But.
I have a question about the super jump.
Yeah.
Super jump. I remember my middle finger and my this finger, pointer finger, remembers the super jump. It's probably 15, 20 years back. The shoulder remembers the super jump, holding the thing in a particular way and kind of leaning into it.
Absolutely.
And then jumping. So one thing that's kind of missing for me about Jane McGonigal's presentation of these issues is the body, the way the body remembers.
Absolutely.
Even the gentleman that you showed, he's leaning forward. It's not a sedentary player in the way that we understand sedentary. The entire body is ready for the next move. So I wonder, how would we implement that in terms of language learning in this type of gaming situation, the body and the embodiment?
Well, that's a very complicated question. I absolutely agree. I think that is sort of missing from it's actually missing from pretty much, I think, everything we see on language learning for sure. One thing that we did in an attempt to sort of address that issue, not from a player perspective, but definitely from a learner perspective, is that every motion you see in Croquetlandia was actually mapped using a motion capture machine in a virtual world. So any gesture that you see, which is very important in pragmatics, right? Any gesture that you see, that actually was a gesture made by a native speaker, that particular native speaker in that particular context. So that is a way that we did address that. In the 3D space, it's a lot easier, right? Because you can, and ultimately, hopefully, I've not given up. I don't think we're anywhere near it, but I haven't given up on the idea we might have a space someday for language learning in a 3D space that's really, really usable, right? Croquetlandia is a research prototype. I mean, it's way too expensive to build that huge out. I haven't given up on the idea we might someday, but that would be the idea. Then you can actually make gestural choices from your avatar as well and learn to control your body with different images. There is some work, Alelo, a company out of California, is doing some work for the military actually on tactical Iraqi Pashto. They have French now. They're very, very aware of gesture because it's so important for soldiers. So if you forget to take off your sunglasses and put them on your head, for example, they actually won't talk to you. They keep walking away. And so they've attempted at least to sort of capture that idea. In terms of the place-based mobile games, of course, it's a whole different experience, right? It's not the same as a super jump. You don't have to master any skills on a device to do anything. So the idea is then that experimentation is training the mind, really, to do something. But yeah, absolutely. Very good point. Other questions? That's it? Everyone's in silence?
I have a question about, you pointed a couple of times to the students recognizing the fictionality, but then at the same time there are these moments where they meet somebody who's from the game and out there in real life. I was wondering to what degree do you thematize that, the simulation aspect of the games and how that relates to sort of being an odd access point into a culture, but really a simulation of that culture?
Right, that's a really good question actually. A couple of answers to it. One is that the idea is that we're not teaching, one thing that's really important to me is we're not teaching this is how it is. I don't believe there's a native speaker I don't believe there is a culture, a community. I know this is controversial. Lots of people have different opinions. But the idea that I could actually teach you to go to Mexico and be successful because you did this, this, and this doesn't work for me. So the idea with these games is why they're so exciting to me is actually I can teach you skills to be successful wherever you are. So you can instead walk into this situation and say, I have no idea what this culture is like, but I can actually observe what's happening. I can talk with others. I can sort of say things like, I don't really know how to do this yet, but could you help me apologize? Things like that. And so for me, it's about building those sort of metalinguistic cultural skills. And games can do that really well. So that would be that one thing. The other thing is in terms of realness. They've done some research. Have you heard of the Stanley Milgram psychology experiments they did in the 60s? Basically, one of the reasons we have the IRB. But basically what they did is they hooked people up, real people, up to different electrodes. And then you had to keep pushing the button to see how far you would be willing to hurt someone else based on different scenarios, right? I mean, it's a terrible experiment. What they did is they simulated that in a virtual environment. And what they found out was that basically you can put me, say, in front of the screen, sitting here, and I hurt the virtual character. I absolutely know it's not real. I know that it's just a computer thing. And what happens actually is all of the things they measure in the brain and the stress level and the blood pressure, everything was almost identical to what they found in the real experiments with the real people. So there is a connection with those virtual spaces, and it becomes sort of like, oh my gosh, I don't want to hurt this person, I don't want to hurt this person. And so I think there's a lot to be said there about feeling like something might matter even when it kind of doesn't in a virtual space. So I don't know if that answers your question.
You were just talking about metalinguistic and cultural skills, and I'm just wondering to what degree beyond language learning scenarios. I mean, obviously, you are in the Southwest, you are a Spanish instructor, you are in Spanish environments. I'm just wondering to what degree you see something like this applicable to a broader cultural skill set, maybe not necessarily grounded in language instruction.
Instruction, absolutely. So I could see it working equally well for any language. I just use Spanish because that's how I happen to be. I think in a lot of places, for example, in Minneapolis, right, there was a large Hmong population. It would have worked well. So it's finding sort of those pockets in terms of those kinds of interactions. But also I see this type of training working really well for anyone who has to walk into an intercultural situation and make decisions quickly about how to interact with people. So training diplomats, for example, would be one area that would be extremely important to me, right? We have a lot of U.S. diplomats especially who go abroad and make lots of cultural faux pas that end up in lots of newsreels, and right, so that's one area I definitely see. International teachers who go abroad to teach other subjects, it doesn't have to be language, right? They're even teaching in English language schools abroad. But the idea of sort of how do you establish your role as a teacher and not, those would be two examples I can think of. Medical personnel is another sort of obvious one. They've been doing actually a lot of work with medical simulation already. One issue we have, for example, is what do you do when you have a doctor who speaks the target language of their patient, but they're in the United States and there are certain cultural expectations. So how does that doctor and patient actually negotiate those roles? Do you use the pragmatic sort of behaviors of the country you're in or the culture you're in? Do you use the pragmatic behaviors of the patient to get them to do things? And so it's a very, very tenuous situation. And so how do you get that to work? I think is another way. I'm working with another professor right now who does sign language interpreting. And so we're trying to figure out how could we use mobile devices to sort of aid sign language interpreters, and what does that look like as well. I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I appreciate your suggestion that we share empirical data about this and open a conversation. And at the same time, my concern is that Hogan Mifflin might beat us out in a certain way. That in 5 years or so, they will figure out how to hire a slew of designers that will do this for us and then distribute it to us, regardless of what we think of their methodology?
They will and they are.
Okay.
And I can, in full disclosure, I'm actually working with a publishing company right now on exactly that premise. I was so sick of all of these materials that were coming out from people who were non-experts, right? Games are being designed right now by no one who has done any game playing, who looks at different things. And so what I said to the publisher flat out was, I will help you, I will work on this project, but we have to follow empirical data, we have to collect, we have to do focus groups. So I mean, everyone has sort of a different opinion. I think open source is coming, and I hope it's coming soon. But I sort of said, well, if I can't beat them, maybe I should join them and figure out how to make it better. Because the reality is that the everyday K through 12 instructor is not going to spend time. They don't have time to be able to build things. So if we can actually build things that are useful for them and are pedagogically sound and do follow this sort of idea about empirical data, maybe we can actually change something. I don't know, it's probably idealistic, absolutely, I get that. But that's sort of my goal, at least, is giving back in that direction. In the case of Spanish, it's even more, right? I mean, we have these huge textbook companies who all they want to do is sell first semester Spanish. And so what do we do to sort of make those materials better? I don't know. So, but yeah, hopefully they would look at our data. But mostly I want to get their data as well. That was the other caveat, right? Let's collect all this data and let's figure out what's actually going on. And let me share it. Let me show it to my colleagues. Let me use it to actually improve things in interesting ways. We'll see. I'll let you know how it goes. We're just starting. We're in the middle of it, so negotiating it. So.
We've seen lately a lot of global simulation projects, one for CERCLL, and other courses that are taught using global simulation. Are you involved in something like that? And I see a lot of similarities between what you do and global simulation projects.
I am not, you mean global simulation in terms, I don't know, I'm not familiar with what you've done here, I'm sorry, in terms of simulation.
I mean, the course itself will be designed with the students to go to
right, to go to
neighborhood and act as if they actually live in this area.
Right.
They have neighbors, they need to know their neighbors, go to the groceries and stuff like that.
Right. I mean, I think, yeah, definitely. I think games are a form of simulation. What I like, and the way I see them as being different is games tend to exaggerate and tend to not give one way or one path of being successful. A lot of simulations, I don't know if that's true of the ones in Bill here, I'm sorry if I'm saying something I shouldn't, but basically the idea that if you only have one way to be successful in a simulation, then it's actually not really teaching you as much. It's teaching you that one way, but it's not teaching you to make choices about what might or might not work, because the reality is we can act however we want, right? No one's going to come in and, bonk us with a hammer and say, that's it, you're out, game over. But they do get mad, they do get upset, they don't like to work with you, and so the idea would be to give as many choices, I think, in a simulation as you can. And then also exaggerate a little. Right? I mean, that's what's fun about games. There has to be something exciting. In the mobile play space, you get all kinds of trophies, and all of a sudden this trophy pops up, and you're like, what? Well, no one gets trophies in real life for eating a taco, right? I mean, and so those are sort of how I see them as being different. Now, medical simulation, of course, is really, really different. There is one way, or there are two correct ways. If you don't do it right, you better be sure that you operate correctly. The same would be true, say, of translation, some things, right? You want to be sure those things are working, but in terms of language, I see it being a little more flexible for important reasons, actually. Max?
You talked a lot about, obviously, literal types of literacies, but did you run into any issues with your students having trouble engaging with the sort of gaming literacies, the multimodal literacies that are embedded in the game itself? Were there problems learning that?
Absolutely. Yeah, and so part of what we're trying to do is help them understand that as an important cultural practice. Whether you're a gamer or not, there are certain skills, right, technologically and other, that you need to learn. And so part of it for me is saying, yeah, let's try and do something different. I know it's not something you've ever done before, but maybe you like it, maybe you won't. And for the most part, we didn't really, have trouble with that. Crooked-Landia itself doesn't require very much game literacy in that way. I've only played WoW with graduate students, so I can't really speak to that question. I'm imagining it to be much more complex and much more difficult that way.